the library and technology.
One of the other things that we looked at was the library and media center at each school. There's a lot of information on here, like how many computers they have, how many laptops, how many mobile labs. But the two things that I'd like to point out are that are differences are that at Narragansett, the databases that they use are individually selected based on what they think the needs are of the population. So it's limited, but very selected. And North Kingstown High School, they use the town public library's database, so it's bigger, but not as carefully handpicked, if you will. They both have about the same kind of staff, and the same kind of hours. In terms of how they use the library, that's really where we saw the biggest difference. At Narragansett High School, their library is very welcoming. They've got a librarian who actually almost co-teaches classes with English teachers and others. And at North Kingstown, it's much more of a resource as a typical library. So at Narragansett, the library is kind of an integral part of the curriculum, and that was a difference that was very obvious to us. In terms of budget and circulation, their funding processes are a little bit different, and their average age and collection size is interestingly identical. In terms of technology, which is the next page, again, they both have similar technology. There isn't one that's far ahead of the other. I guess the two differences, again, that we would point out here are that Narragansett High School chooses to lease their equipment, and they feel that means that they can be more constantly up to date because they can replace it every 3 years or 5 years, depending on the agreement. Where North Kingstown High School purchases all their equipment. And then the only other thing is North Kingstown has a stable of Macintosh computers, which supports the visual arts department, which Narragansett High School doesn't have. But essentially, in terms of technology, they're pretty well suited. Narragansett uses a slightly different and maybe not quite as sophisticated smart technology. They use smaller screens than the typical smart board that you guys have seen around here. But otherwise, they're in similar places.
Okay, the next section that we looked at were just some factors that affected school environment. And again, keeping in mind that North Kingstown, when you walk into that high school, it's roughly 3.5 times larger than Narragansett High School. And we can tell you as a committee, we all felt that walking in. Narragansett is, especially for somebody who's newer to the district like me, it felt like I was coming back home to school. It was very much, quieter environment. It's a single level building. It's compact, it's intimate, it's quiet. North Kingstown High School is a 3-level building and has 3.5 times more kids. It's livelier, and we all commented on that difference. It was high energy, we're spread out. The kids are moving, from place to place to get to class, and they've got some distance to cover to get to class. They both obviously have standard codes of behavior that are requirements within their handbooks, and have disciplinary codes and things like that they all follow. We did just put in some information in this, in the booklet for you that was provided via the RIDE website on incidences of suspensions, and you can just see that the numbers. Keeping in mind that information that is there is not the number of students who were involved in suspensions. Those, a suspension could be anywhere from 1 day to 10 days. So just keep in mind that information is not, one individual student. Or 1 or 2 individual students. But that was just some information we felt that was important that the committee share with the group regarding the factors affecting the school environment. The next section of the booklet has to do with achievement data and awards, and Dr. Vision will address that.
Thank you, Gwen. As a high school review committee, we felt that student achievement data was extremely important, and we spent a great deal of time analyzing it. What we did, we call disaggregation. When you look at the average scores, and that's the kind of score that the Projo will report, when you average numbers, you lose the details and you lose the richness of the data. So we looked at the averages, but then we broke that apart to see what other information we could glean. And we start off with the New England Common Assessment Program that we also fondly call NECAP. And NECAP is our state testing program. And we share that program with Vermont and New Hampshire. Now this state testing program is an annual test, and from grades 3 to 8 it's given every year. At the high school level it's given only once, and that's at the 11th grade. And students are tested in reading, math, writing, and science. The math, reading, and writing is given in the fall. And we get the results usually by the end of January. It was given, and science is given then in the spring of 11th grade. So this year's 11th graders took these series of tests in September, but we don't yet have those results. So this is a fairly new testing program at the high school level. The first time it was given was in 07-08. So we only have 2 years of NECAP data to take a look at. Now one thing I would like to point out, because we're going to be looking at some tests that are nationally ranked and nationally normed, is that state tests are constructed to test what the state says should be taught and learned in its state. So comparing state tests, you're comparing apples to oranges to bananas, because every state right now has different standards, and then they create a test to test their own standards. NECAP is the only test that does include 3 states, albeit that they're all small states. But it's a different sort of test than, say, the Scholastic Aptitude test, the SAT test that we're going to be looking at next. Student achievement on these tests is ranked into 4 achievement levels. And according to the Department of Education publication, student performance levels of the ranking goes 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 is labeled proficient with distinction. 3 is proficient. Now those 2 levels, 3 and 4, indicate that a student has a level of proficiency necessary to begin working on the grade level content for that year. Students scoring 2 are called partially proficient, and those that are scoring 1 are substantially below proficient. Now we have a federal law called No Child Left Behind, and I'm sure that you have read something about it in the news over the last several years. Well, the No Child Left Behind legislation requires that states create these state tests to test their standards, and that by the year 2014, all students, regardless of ability, will score at proficient or above on state tests. Now, given, in your report, you have the charts for the last 2 years for Narragansett High School and North Jamestown High School. But so looking at the 11th grade scores for Narragansett in 08-09, which was this past year, showed substantial improvement over the year before in math, reading, writing, and especially in science. In fact, Narragansett was recognized in the state as one of the high schools that improved the most in the state in the science achievement. North Kingstown scores declined from 07 to